Hey, Jennifer here. We have a new story for you today. It's got protective energy and a moment that changes everything. Let's begin.
My mom called my 13-year-old daughter too ugly to attend her cousin's birthday party. My sister nodded in agreement. Then we were turned away at the door. I didn't cry. I took action. 10 days later, their lives turned upside down because my daughter Emma was holding a gift bag with silver tissue paper when we walked up my sister Heather's front steps. There were pink balloons tied to the rail, music coming from the living room, and at least 6 cars already parked along the curb. Emma had spent an hour getting ready in a pale blue dress she picked out herself, and she kept smoothing the skirt with one hand while gripping the gift with the other. "Do you think Paige will like it?" she asked me for the 3rd time. I told her yes, because her cousin Paige had wanted that bracelet set for weeks, and because 13-year-old girls still deserve to arrive at a birthday party expecting joy instead of strategy. I could hear kids laughing inside before I rang the bell. Emma smiled when footsteps came toward the door. Then it opened, and my sister didn't say hello. Heather looked at Emma, then at me, then back at Emma again, and every bit of air on that porch changed shape. She kept one hand on the door and one shoulder pressed against the frame like she was bracing for weather. That was the first warning. "Heather, move," I said lightly at first, thinking maybe trays were coming through or kids were running around. She didn't move. She looked past me once, toward the driveway, then lowered her voice and said, "Erica, I need you not to make this hard." Emma's fingers tightened around the gift bag. I asked what she was talking about, and Heather swallowed before saying, "Paige doesn't want Emma at the party." She said it in that careful tone people use when they're trying to make cruelty sound administrative. I actually laughed once, because it was so absurd. "It's family," I said. "She's a kid, not a nightclub bouncer." Heather's face hardened. "It's Paige's birthday, and I'm respecting her choice," Heather said, using Paige's wishes like a shield for something she clearly agreed with herself. I could see the dining table behind her, set with pink plates and a cake stand. I could also see my niece's friends in the hall, along with a couple of adults lingering near the entry, all dressed up and all pretending not to stare. Emma stopped shifting her weight. She went completely still beside me. I said, "You invited us." Heather answered, "I invited you before Paige made her feelings clear about Emma." Then she planted both feet and stayed there. She never meant to let us in. I asked what feelings could possibly justify turning away a 13-year-old girl on a front porch. Heather glanced over her shoulder like she needed backup, then leaned toward me and said, "It's not personal. Paige just wants a certain atmosphere tonight." I remember that word because it sounded so ridiculous next to a bowl of dollar store candy and a rented speaker playing pop music from the hallway. "Atmosphere," I repeated. Heather nodded, embarrassed and committed at the same time. "There are photos, Erica. Her school friends are here. She doesn't want anything distracting." Emma's face changed at the word distracting, but she still didn't speak. She just lowered her eyes to the gift bag like maybe the ribbon on it required urgent attention. I asked Heather what exactly was supposed to be distracting about my child. My sister took a breath and said, "Coming in like this, looking like this, it changes the whole feel." She said it softly, which somehow made it worse. Not loud enough to own, not quiet enough to deny. Inside the house, somebody shouted that the pizza had arrived. Heather flinched, then gave me a tight look as if I was the one ruining the evening. My sister was measuring my daughter against the decorations. Then my mother, Janet, stepped into the hall behind Heather, already annoyed, already prepared. She had lipstick on, store-perfect hair, and that brisk expression she used when she wanted everyone to remember she ran things. "What is taking so long?" she asked, and before I could answer, she looked directly at Emma and said, "I told you what needed to be done." I stared at her. "Excuse me?" Janet folded her arms. "Don't act shocked." She had every chance to make herself presentable. Heather took half a step back, relieved to let our mother carry it. I said, "Presentable for a child's birthday party?" Janet's mouth tightened. "A little makeup would have handled this. We discussed it. She refused. That is not our fault." Emma made the smallest sound beside me, like she was trying not to breathe too hard. I heard movement farther inside and saw my father Ronald at the end of the hall, frozen with a paper cup in his hand, doing exactly nothing. Then Janet said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "If she insists on looking like that, then it's her own fault she's too ugly to attend." Heather gave a small nod beside her. Nobody corrected either of them. Nobody even gasped. The porch got very quiet after that. For 1 second, I thought about putting my hand on Heather's shoulder and moving her myself. I thought about walking Emma straight past every one of them, setting the gift on the table, and letting the whole room watch me ask what kind of family humiliates a child at the door. Then Emma touched my sleeve. I looked down, and her face had gone blank in that way children use when they're trying to keep themselves from falling apart in public. "Mom," she said, barely above a whisper, "I don't want to be here." Heather exhaled like she'd won an argument. From somewhere on the stairs, my niece Paige called, "Are they leaving?" She didn't sound confused. She sounded irritated that this was taking too long, as if the decision had already been made before we ever reached the door. I bent down and took the gift bag from Emma's hand before anyone inside could say we should at least leave it. "Yes," I answered for us both. I stood up and looked at my mother first, then my sister. "You don't get this present. You don't get her. You get this memory." Janet rolled her eyes and said, "Don't be dramatic." Emma had already turned toward the steps. I followed her down to the car while music kept playing inside the house, like nothing ugly had happened at all. We drove away with the gift still between us. I didn't wait until morning. I waited until we were halfway home. Because Emma was staring out the window so hard, I knew she needed silence before she needed comfort. Then I pulled into an empty pharmacy parking lot, turned off the engine, and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring with, "Have you calmed down?" I said, "You called your granddaughter ugly." Janet answered, "I told her the truth." Emma's condition is vitiligo. Pale patches spread across parts of her cheeks and around one eye. It causes her no pain, no danger, and no medical emergency. It only causes trouble when adults decide a child's face belongs to public opinion. Janet knew exactly what it was. She also knew Emma had stopped covering it with makeup a few months earlier. "This could all have been avoided," my mother said. She could have used foundation for one evening. I asked if she hurt herself. She said, "The patches are not the issue. The stubbornness is. She refuses to fix something fixable." I looked over at Emma, who kept facing the window. "There is nothing to fix," I said. Janet clicked her tongue. "You are raising her to think the world will rearrange itself around her feelings." That was where the real fight began. I told my mother very clearly that Emma's face was not a family project and not a lesson plan. Janet answered with the same voice she used when correcting hems in her store. Better she hears honesty from family than cruelty from strangers later. I said, humiliating a 13-year-old at a front door is not honesty. It's cowardice. Beside me, Emma finally moved. She leaned her forehead against the glass and shut her eyes, and that small motion did more to me than Janet's whole speech. My mother kept talking about discipline, presentation, standards, the same old words she used whenever she wanted control to sound moral. I let her finish. Then I said, "Listen carefully. My daughter is beautiful exactly as she is. No one gets to decide what goes on her face, and no one who speaks to her like that gets access to her afterward." Janet laughed once and said, "You'll come around." "No," I told her. "You think tonight put her in her place. It didn't. It showed me mine." I ended the call before she could answer. Emma never asked what I meant. She didn't need to. They thought the story ended at the door. It didn't. Heather is 3 years older than I am, and in our family that somehow became a job title. She was the one my mother dressed first, praised first, excused first. When we grew up and had daughters close in age, the pattern slid forward like furniture being moved into a new room. Paige was a year older than Emma and automatically treated as the one to watch, the one to photograph, the one to center, so it didn't take long for her to absorb the same standards the adults rewarded. Then, when Emma was little, pale patches started showing on her face. At first they were small enough that only I noticed them when I washed her hair or wiped toothpaste off her chin. A dermatologist later gave it a name and a calm explanation, but before any of that mattered, Emma looked at herself in the mirror one morning and asked, "Did my skin forget some color?" I said, "A little." She shrugged and went back to lining up toy animals on the bathroom counter. That was the whole scene. No tears, no fear, no tragedy. She was still the same child who wanted glitter sneakers and dinosaur stickers on her lunchbox. The problem did not arrive in her body first. It arrived in the room after other people saw it. Emma wasn't the one who made it heavy. My mother was the first person who taught Emma to notice being noticed. She would look too long, then try to hide the look by fussing with a collar or brushing a stray hair back from Emma's forehead. "Have you decided what you're going to do about that?" she asked me one afternoon while Emma was coloring at her kitchen table. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't even gesture discreetly. Emma stopped coloring and touched her cheek. I answered the way I always did then. "Her doctor says she's healthy, and we're not treating her like she's broken." Janet sighed as if I was the difficult one. "Healthy is one thing, socially comfortable is another." I said, "She's 7. My mother slid a plate of cookies across the table toward Paige and added, "Which is exactly why habits start now." Emma looked at me, not confused yet, but alert. That expression got more common after that. Before school pictures, before church, before holiday dinners, Janet would mention options. A little concealer, a tinted moisturizer, just enough to soften it. Every suggestion came wrapped like a favor. Every suggestion taught the same lesson. By the time Emma understood what vitiligo was, she had already learned other people expected an apology for it. The clearest moment came at my mother's boutique on the square when Paige was 8 and Emma was 7. It was late afternoon, and Heather and I were helping move sale racks while my mother fussed over a new window display. Paige had found a straw hat and was twirling in front of the mirror while my mother clapped like she was watching a pageant. "Look at you," Janet said. "When you grow up, you could be the face of this store." Paige beamed and did another turn. Emma lit up. She stepped beside her cousin, grinning, and said, "Me too. I want to be the face too." The room should have held for half a second while some loving adult said, "Yes, of course you're both beautiful." Instead, my mother laughed lightly and said, "Oh, sweetheart, maybe you'd rather do something behind the scenes." Heather added, "You're creative. You could design the flyers." Paige kept admiring herself in the mirror. Emma's smile stayed on for another second, then disappeared so fast it almost looked like I imagined it. She said, "Oh," and reached for a scarf she didn't need. Nobody yelled. Nobody called her ugly. That would have been easier to fight. They just shifted her off the stage and called it practicality. That was when I saw the hierarchy clearly. After that, the message never changed. Before Easter photos, Janet would hold up a compact and say, "Just for the camera, honey." Before church, Heather would tell Emma, "Your cousin is doing a little lip gloss and powder. You could at least even things out." At Thanksgiving, Paige once leaned over the bathroom sink and announced, "My mom says pictures are forever," while tapping blush onto her cheeks like a tiny adult. Emma stood beside her with her hands flat on the counter and said nothing at all. I got good at taking things out of people's hands. I got good at saying, "No one asked for your opinion." I also got good at minimizing it later, which is the part I regret. I kept telling myself these were comments, not campaigns. Annoying, not dangerous. Petty, not defining. But kids do not separate those things the way adults do. They collect them. By the time the girls were old enough to care deeply about how they looked in photos, Paige had absorbed the idea that beauty gave her rank, and Emma had absorbed the idea that she needed permission to belong. In that family, appearance was treated like a password. The only thing that interrupted that pattern was Emma finding women online who looked like her and did not hide. It started with one video, then a week of screenshots at the kitchen table. "Look," she said one night, turning her phone toward me. "She didn't cover anything." Another time she said, "This one did a whole campaign." She wasn't asking permission. She was building a map. The first day she decided not to use makeup at all, she came downstairs with clean skin and a steady face. Janet noticed at dinner and asked, "So this is permanent now?" Emma answered before I could. "Not the vitiligo. Just me not hiding it." Heather made a face into her glass. Paige snorted. I said, "Yes, that is permanent." The stronger Emma got, the harder they pushed. Every event became a negotiation. Family photos, church, birthday dinner, there were always pictures, always guests, always some reason this one time should be different. Emma stopped debating. "Nobody gets to tell me what to do with my face," she said before Paige's party when Janet brought it up over speakerphone. I told them Emma was coming as herself or not at all. I thought they would sulk. I did not think they would use a front porch to make a child kneel. That night, after we got home, I thought Emma had gone to bed early. The house was quiet, and for 20 minutes I let myself believe she wanted sleep more than conversation. Then I passed the bathroom and saw light under the door. When I knocked, she said nothing. I opened it anyway. Her makeup bag was dumped across the sink like somebody had shaken it upside down in a panic. Foundation was smeared over the counter, streaked on a towel, rubbed into the sleeve of her dress. Emma was standing too close to the mirror, one hand braced on the edge of the sink, the other trying to spread foundation across the pale patches on her cheek with shaking fingers. It didn't match. It sat on her skin in muddy bands, making her look less like herself every time she tried again. "Emma," I said, moving toward her. She flinched and grabbed another sponge. "Wait." Her voice broke on that one word. "I can do it better." I took the sponge gently and set it down. She wiped at her face with the heel of her hand, only smearing it more. Then she looked at me through the mirror and whispered the sentence I had been afraid of since the porch. Maybe they were right. I felt something in me lock into place. Once she started crying, the rest came out fast and ugly. She sat on the edge of the tub in her dress, foundation drying on her jaw, and told me things she had never said out loud. She said she used to imagine one day people would notice her in a good way. Not because she hid well, not because she fixed enough, but because she looked striking and different and right in her own skin. "Like those girls online," she said. "Or just at school. In pictures. Anywhere." Then she laughed at herself, a sharp little sound that made me want to break every mirror in the room. "That's so embarrassing." I knelt in front of her and said there was nothing embarrassing about wanting to be seen kindly. She shook her head. "No one picks the girl who looks like me, Mom. Not for anything." She said it flatly, like she was finally admitting math after pretending not to know the answer. I had spent years correcting comments and smoothing over damage. Sitting there on the tile floor, I realized soothing was not going to be enough anymore. My family had not just hurt her feelings. They had handed her a future she was starting to believe in. That was the point where my anger became useful. The next morning, I didn't call my mother back. I didn't text Heather. I went into the bathroom, threw the half-used makeup wipes into the trash, and told Emma to wash her face. She looked at me like she was bracing for another pep talk. Instead, I put my hands on her cheeks and said, "No, I am not letting them do this to you." Then I told her to wash her face and wait for me. I had one stop to make first. Lena, a woman I knew from work, ran promo shoots and social media for a different children's boutique on Main Street, not my mother's store. She was smart, fast, and one of the few people in town who understood how quickly an image could change a room. I drove there without an appointment. Lena was steaming a rack of summer dresses when I walked in, still angry enough that I could hear it in my breathing. She looked up and said, "Erica?" I told her what happened at the party from start to finish, without softening any of it. I told her I was not there for pity. "I need one chance," I said, "for my daughter to be seen before they teach her not to be." Lena listened with the steamer hissing between us, then set it down and asked, "Can Emma be here at 10? That question changed the day. Emma did not bounce back because I made a plan. She argued the whole drive. "This is just to make me feel better," she said. "I don't want people staring." I told her people were already staring, and we were done letting them decide what a stare meant. The studio corner was nothing special. A roll of cream paper clipped to stands, 2 lights, a table with safety pins and hair ties, and a fan that rattled every time it turned. Lena introduced us to the photographer, a college kid named Mia, and I watched Emma brace herself for correction. It never came. No one reached for concealer. No one tilted her chin away from one side of her face. Mia just lifted the camera and said, "Stay exactly like that." Emma frowned, unsure she'd heard right. Lena adjusted a denim jacket and repeated it. "No, Really, don't fix anything. The first 10 minutes were stiff. Emma kept touching her hair, then dropping her hand. She kept trying to smile the way people do in school photos when they want to disappear. Then Mia said, "Look straight at me like you're tired of being told what to do." Something in Emma's face settled. It was the first honest expression I had seen since the party. Nobody in that room treated her face like a mistake. 10 days later, I walked Emma past the front window and watched her stop so hard her sneakers squeaked on the sidewalk. Her photo was printed almost as tall as she was. Same face, same pale patches around her eye and across her cheek, same chin she always lifted when she was trying to look braver than she felt. No filters, no heavy editing, no blur to make other people comfortable. Just Emma in a yellow cardigan, looking directly out through the glass. She covered her mouth with both hands and laughed, which I had not heard much that week. Inside, Lena waved us in and handed Emma a stack of flyers for the town's late summer shopping weekend. Emma was on those too. By afternoon, she was on the store's page, and by evening, women I barely knew were commenting things like striking, gorgeous, unforgettable. Girls from school started sending messages. Some were awkward, some sweet, some just surprised, but none sounded like pity. One of Emma's classmates wrote, "You look so cool." That mattered more than any adult compliment could. At dinner, she kept pretending not to refresh the post while refreshing it every few minutes anyway. People were finally seeing her as presence instead of damage. In a small town, one window display can become conversation by noon and folklore by the weekend. The weekly local paper called Lena for a feature on the campaign, and Lena asked if Emma wanted to answer a few questions. Emma looked at me first. I said, "Only if you want to." She said yes, but with the face of someone stepping onto thin ice. The reporter met us by the shop window with a notebook and asked questions. The story went online the next evening, and the print edition landed on porches Thursday morning. How did this come together? What did it mean to Emma to model for the store? Emma answered carefully until the reporter asked, "So what made you say yes?" Emma looked at her own photo in the glass, and then said, in the flat, honest voice 13-year-olds use when they are too hurt to decorate a sentence, "My grandmother said I was too ugly to attend my cousin's birthday party, so I wanted to prove her wrong." The reporter froze. I felt my whole body go still, not because it was untrue, but because it was so cleanly true. By evening, I was getting texts from numbers I didn't have saved. By the next morning, women at the grocery store were looking at me with startled sympathy. The story had left the family and entered the town. After that, nobody controlled it. My mother called as soon as the paper hit porches on Thursday. She did not ask how Emma was doing. She opened with, "What has she told people?" and then kept going without a breath. There had been whispers at church, she said. Women were staring at her in the post office. One of her regular customers had canceled a fitting. "Do you understand what this is doing to the store?" she snapped. I was standing at my kitchen counter slicing strawberries for Emma's lunch, while my mother described herself as the victim of a campaign nobody had needed to start. "People are looking at us like we're monsters," she said. I set down the knife and answered, "She didn't invent anything." Janet said, "A child doesn't understand nuance." I laughed once. There was no nuance at the door. Janet shifted immediately to business. Gossip hurts reputations. Reputations hurt sales. Sales hurt livelihoods. The whole speech told on her more clearly than any apology ever could have. Not once did she mention her granddaughter crying in our bathroom. When she paused, maybe expecting me to soothe her, I said, "You are living with the sentence you chose." Then I hung up. For the first time in my life, I did not explain myself to my mother. The next mistake they made was thinking they could bully the town the same way they had bullied Emma. Instead of apologizing, my mother gave the local paper a statement full of polished lies. She said she had never called Emma ugly. She said the quote had been twisted by a sensitive child who sometimes dramatized things for attention. Then she took the same lie to the town Facebook page where local businesses advertised sales and church suppers. Heather backed her up within minutes. My sister wrote that our family had always supported Emma and that the article had hurt good people who had only ever tried to help. Heather added that Emma was old enough to know words had consequences, which was a brutal thing to say about a 13-year-old after publicly calling her a liar without using the exact word yet. Other people used it for them soon enough. I sat at my dining table reading comments pile up from strangers who did not know us well enough to question adults. Some defended Emma. Some played both sides. A few wrote that kids today liked going viral. Heather even texted me, "Tell her to stop this before she ruins everybody." I read that line twice and then deleted the thread. They had decided that smearing a child was easier than being ashamed. The denial reached school before lunch. Emma walked in the door that afternoon with her backpack half-zipped and her face set in that strained way I had started to recognize. She dropped the bag on the floor so hard a notebook slid out and skidded under the table. "They said I'm lying now," she said before I could ask how the day went. I took one step toward her, and she folded in on herself like all the strength from the photo shoot had been rented. Kids had shown her screenshots between classes. One girl asked if she had made the whole thing up for attention. A boy she'd known since elementary school said his mother thought there were two sides to every story. Emma stood in the kitchen crying and trying not to cry. "I told the truth," she kept saying. "I literally told the truth." I held her while she shook, but even while I was doing it, I knew comfort was not the next move. The wound had changed shape. This was no longer about beauty. It was about whether grown women could rewrite a child's memory in public and get away with it. By the time she sat down at the table, I already knew what I had to do. This time I needed proof. I pulled out a legal pad after dinner and started rebuilding the porch scene one person at a time. Who had been in the yard? Who had been inside the hall? Who had been close enough to hear Janet's voice carry? I remembered a neighbor dropping off a balloon arch, one of Heather's friends carrying soda from her trunk, a couple of parents lingering after early drop-off, and my father Ronald standing inside with that useless paper cup. Then I started calling. The first two people sounded nervous. The third sounded guilty before I even finished the question. "Yes," she said quietly. "I heard your mom say it." Another woman admitted she'd heard enough to know Emma had been singled out, but she hadn't wanted to get involved until the Facebook post called the girl dramatic. "That was too much," she said. One by one, people stopped protecting the peace once my mother and sister went public. I wrote down names, times, exact positions. The next morning, I took the list straight to the paper. This time, it wasn't just Emma's word and mine. It was witnesses. The follow-up article ran online first. By lunchtime, the town page had turned hard. People were furious that two grown women heard a child tell the truth and tried to crush her again. That was the real flip. We cut contact after that. There was no dramatic family summit, no tearful showdown in a parking lot, no final Christmas reconciliation scene. I stopped answering. Emma stopped asking whether we had to go to things. Life got quieter in a way that let us hear ourselves again. About a year later, an invitation to Paige's next birthday arrived in the mail, all pastel script and no mention of the previous one. I set it on the counter, and Emma glanced at it once before saying, "No." I said, "Okay." And that was the family vote. Later, I started hearing about the party from other people because that is how information moves in a small town when everyone is trying not to gossip. Apparently, a lot of people did not go. Some sent excuses. Some ignored the invitation. By most accounts, it was mostly Paige and her parents with a couple of family friends who were too entangled to stay away. I had complicated feelings about that. Paige was still a child, even if she had been cruel. Children learn status from the adults who feed it to them, and she had been fed a lot. But consequences still land where they land. What happened on that porch had not stayed on that porch. Some lessons echo longer than parties do. Around that same time, I started hearing another set of updates through town channels I no longer had to stand inside. My mother's boutique was struggling. People had not forgotten. Some refused to shop there on principle. Some simply never looked at her the same way again. Then I heard the store was finally closing. A few weeks after that, someone told me Heather had been talking about leaving town because the whole thing still followed them everywhere. I took in the information the way I would take in weather from a neighboring county. Noted, real, not mine to manage. Meanwhile, Emma's life kept opening. Lena brought her back for more local shoots. She made friends, not the kind who rank girls in hallways, but the kind who come over in sweatpants and leave cereal bowls in my sink. She laughed more. She looked people in the eye more. She stopped reaching automatically for her hair whenever someone raised a phone for a picture. One evening we walked down Main Street past the shop windows, and Emma caught her reflection and kept going without checking it twice. That was the whole victory for me. Not revenge, not scandal, not their closing doors, just my daughter moving through town like she had every right to be seen. And really, isn't that the only ending that matters? So what do you think? Did I do the right thing by fighting back, or did I take it too far after what they did to my daughter? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more stories.